What was the fastest way you have seen someone ruin their own life? A couple of guys in my hometown were looking for something to steal so they could sell it to buy drugs. They come to a house where no one was supposed to be home, and one guy gets out of the car and goes to the house to steal a grill. A friend of the homeowner happened to be there and came out when he stepped onto the porch. He tells the friend that he is looking for his dog, so the guy walks out into the yard to help look for it. The would-be robber panics and pulls out a gun and shoots the man in the back of the head. At 21, he started a life sentence for a really stupid murder. Huffing paint. My college buddy was an affable stoner type who liked psychedelics, weed, and drinking. He was broke, so he got into huffing paint over the summer. He passed out with a plastic bag full of spray paint over his face and ended up depriving his brain of oxygen, and is now mentally disabled due to brain damage. Like drooling, slurring, can't tie his own shoes or perform basic life tasks, level disabled. Guy from my school went to rob a corner shop at knife point. He pulled up with his push bike, went into the store, and threatened the shopkeeper with a knife to give him all the money in the register. The shopkeeper refused, and the robber was too pussy to do anything, so he grabbed a pack of gum and ran out. 20 minutes later, the robber realized he left his bike behind in his panic, so he went back to get it. This was at the same time the police were questioning the shopkeeper on the incident. They swiftly arrested him there and then. Think he got 2 years for stealing gum at knife point. Another guy I used to know. At one of my high school's basketball games, there was a stand set up collecting donations for Hurricane Katrina victims. This kid in my grade grabbed the giant container of money in front of his peers and teachers and started running out of the gym and across the football field. He suffered an asthma attack halfway across and was easily taken down and then arrested and expelled. It was a pretty large sum of money too. Anyway, I thought that was stupid and pathetic, but this story takes me cake. Edit. It was our senior year, so we were like 18 years old. In less than 5 years, one of my cousins managed to burn bridges with almost everyone in the family. He married twice, choosing partners as reckless and toxic as himself. Both marriages ended in disaster, leaving emotional and financial wreckage in their wake. During this period, he squandered not one but 2 inheritances, one from his grandparents and the other from an uncle, on frivolous and impulsive ventures, leaving nothing to show for it but debt and regret. When my grandmother generously let him and his first wife live in one of her houses rent-free, they repaid her kindness by trashing the property, leaving it in a state of disrepair. When she reasonably asked them to contribute to the repairs, he reacted with entitlement and outrage, severing ties with her entirely. His second marriage brought more drama, pushing his parents, who had tried to support him for years, to their breaking point. Eventually, his selfishness, poor decisions, and lack of accountability alienated the entire family. His parents, after years of frustration and heartache, ultimately disowned him. Now estranged and without familial support, he stands as a cautionary tale about the cost of entitlement and irresponsibility. His choices left a legacy of broken relationships and squandered opportunities. My half-brother once thought it was a brilliant idea to rob the restaurant where he worked. Unsurprisingly, his plan was doomed from the start. He didn't bother to wear a mask or disguise his voice, making him instantly recognizable to everyone present. At the time, he was hopelessly addicted to crack, so his judgment was far from sound. He convinced his dealer's girlfriend to assist in the heist, and she provided him with what he assumed was a real gun. Desperate and careless, he didn't check the weapon, which turned out to be a BB gun. Somehow, they managed to escape the restaurant with $7,000, but his dealer and the dealer's massive associates were waiting outside. They brutally beat him, stole the money, and left him unconscious for the police to find. He was sentenced to 7 years for armed robbery and grand larceny. On the bright side, he finally kicked his drug habit in prison. A kid I went to high school with used to break into houses with his younger brother to steal phones and other small valuables. They were always a bit off, but I never thought they were capable of real violence. Then one night, they made the mistake of robbing the wrong house. While sneaking into the kitchen, the homeowner walked in, looking for a late-night glass of water. Unfortunately for them, he was a former Marine. A confrontation erupted, and things escalated quickly. One of the brothers pulled out a knife and, in a moment of panic, began repeatedly stabbing the man in the head. Despite their vicious assault, the man miraculously survived, but the trauma left him with lasting mental and physical issues. The brothers fled the scene, but they didn't get far. Police arrested them the next day, thanks to security footage and witness reports. The older brother, who wielded the knife, was sentenced to 30 years in state prison for attempted murder. His younger sibling, being a minor, was sent to juvenile detention and remains there 5 years later. Edit. Owner of the house is apparently still alive, but suffers from a lot of mental issues now. My sister and her husband spiraled into crack addiction, losing their jobs, their house, and ultimately their stability. They moved across the country with their kids, who resented them for their reckless decisions. After a DUI, my sister decided to get sober, but her husband kicked her out for trying to change. She returned home with nothing but the clothes on her back and began rebuilding her life. A year later, her kids joined her, and she worked tirelessly to get back on her feet. Now she's sober, thriving, and in the process of buying a house. Meanwhile, her ex works just to sustain his drug and alcohol habit while living with his mom. Despite everything, she turned her life around. A few years back, one of the students attending the university I work at got caught trying to sneak a shitload of drugs into a local nightclub. The first we found out about it was when some police officers turned up with a warrant to go through his room, and I was the lucky person chosen to go let them in. So I opened the door, and oh dear Lord, there's drugs everywhere. If you've ever seen one of those old-timey pick-and-mix shops with all the sweets in big glass jars, imagine that but with pills and wraps of powder instead. Everything else was all super neat and tidy, and it was one of the cleanest student rooms I'd ever been in, just that every flat surface had a container full of drugs or some other sort of paraphernalia on it. This student was in his 4th year of a master's degree, and due to finish in 3 months. He ended up being charged with possession with intent to supply, and since a lot of the stuff he had in there was Class A, is now going to be in prison for a decade or 2. He was also expelled, of course, and will still be on the hook for £60,000 of student debt afterwards. A friend of mine got married right after high school and left for boot camp shortly after. Not long after his training, he was deployed overseas. Wanting to ensure his wife could handle things back home, he gave her power of attorney, a decision that quickly turned into a nightmare. In just 8 months, she destroyed his credit and racked up over $200,000 in debt under his name. When he returned and confronted the mess, they divorced, but his commanding officer advised him to give her whatever she wants to avoid any potential drama that could affect his military career. Now, on top of his staggering debt, he's stuck paying alimony. What's worse is that he joined the military in the first place to pay for college, but with his financial situation, he's afraid even the GI Bill won't be enough to make that dream a reality. It's heartbreaking. I once knew someone who swapped university courses midway through, so that he could become a teacher in a subject he was more passionate about. We were pleased for him, he was really excited, and it all got off to a great start. He eventually completed his degree and qualified as a teacher in that subject. However, he is no longer a teacher. Why is that? Well, turns out he had sex with 2 underage students and verbally harassed them afterwards. There was a failed 3rd attempt. He then fled to Italy for some reason, he has no connection there as far as I know, to escape justice, eventually turned himself in, and was arrested when he arrived back in the UK. Just shy of 3 years in prison, although he was paroled at around the halfway mark. 10 years on the UK Sex Offender Register with a Supplementary Sexual Harm Prevention Order, SHPO, which controls his interaction with young people. Banned from teaching for life. Apparently that wasn't all. I heard other gossip about his behavior in the classroom which was deeply troubling, but not criminal, so nothing was done. I have no idea what he does now. People have seen him, spoken to him, but he doesn't speak of what happened. No idea what he was thinking or what he initially set out to achieve. Did he go into teaching so that he could do these things? Or did his mind somehow warp a bit later on? Former high school teacher. He was a retired English teacher, former coach, former senior class advisor, confidant for students at risk. Wife was also a teacher, and both their kids went to our school and graduated. Turns out he was being investigated for child porn. I think possession and distribution, not sure about solicitation. He was in school talking to my freshman class in his wife's room about preparing for the future properly the last day of classes. 2 weeks later, we read on the news and papers that state police, sheriffs, and city police raided his house, and he killed himself in the woods out behind his house. He had laptops full of videos and pictures. It shook our town, to say the least. Luckily, the wife was retiring at the end of the year anyway, so she didn't have to live with the shame at the school. I felt so bad for her though. She and the kids were investigated and knew nothing about it. People hide their demons, well, I guess. A friend of mine was just 3 years away from retiring at 53 when he decided to throw everything away. For years, he'd worked hard and enjoyed taking winters off to spend time with his family. But 2 winters ago, everything changed. He started using hard drugs again, eventually turning to meth. Worse, he introduced his 18-year-old son to that destructive lifestyle, teaching him how to do drugs and chase women. He never returned to work, lying to his wife about being let go instead of admitting he chose not to go back. As his life spiraled out of control, he texted me in the middle of the night, saying he planned to hang himself before morning. Thankfully, he also sent the same message to his brother, who called the police for a welfare check. When they arrived, they found meth at his house. Now he's losing his beautiful home and faces living in a camp trailer as he tries to piece his life back together. It's heartbreaking to see someone who once had everything going so well fall so far. He's starting over from rock bottom, and it's unclear if he'll ever regain what he's lost. In high school, I worked at a casino in my hometown and got to know a lot of the regulars. One of them was a guy who was always super friendly. He'd come in often to play the slots, always with a smile and a kind word for everyone. I didn't think much of it at first, just another nice customer. But then I found out the truth about his life, and it was heartbreaking. He used to have a great job, a loving wife, and 2 kids. By all accounts, he seemed to have it all together. But gambling became an addiction that slowly consumed his life. At first, he could manage it, but over time, it spiraled out of control. He started losing more money than he could afford, and his debts piled up. His wife tried to help, but eventually, she couldn't take it anymore and left with the kids. By the time I knew him, he had lost everything: his family, his home, and his savings. The little money he had left went straight into the slot machines. Watching someone lose so much to gambling was a sobering reminder of how destructive it can be. Don't gamble, folks. It's just not worth it. This is a long and complicated story, but here's a short summary. This all happened in the span of about 6 months. A friend of a friend started dating a new lady immediately after his divorce. She was clearly more interested in his money than anything else, and was generally mean and an instigator of problems. But he didn't see that, regardless of how many times people warned him. They'd been dating for a bit, and because she had young children, they were older, her late 30s and late 50s, and his lease was up soon, she convinced him that they needed to buy a house together. She got him to give her his portion of the down payment on the house in cash. He handed over $80K, which was actually most of the total cost. Then she didn't put his name on anything, because his credit wasn't as good as hers. She convinced him to buy all of the furniture, painting, flooring, and other stuff. Her excuse for that was claiming that she was going to pay for some remodeling and a new roof, which the house didn't need, but she lied about. She also convinced him to give her the money for all of those things in cash. When the house was nice and ready, he lived there for about 2 days before she dumped him. She said all this face to face. There's nothing in writing between them. There's no paper trail. There's no text messages. There's no witnesses. It just looks like she paid for the house which is in her name, and that's the end of it. He has no recourse. Lost all of his savings. Depression. A suicide attempt, which led to a lost job. Had to move back in with his ex-wife. A dumbass I knew from school still lived at home with his parents and kept dealing heroin from the house. Their house was directly in between a park and Catholic school and a few houses away from the police station. An undercover cop actually gave him a warning, saying they know everything he is doing and he better stop. He did not stop, so a month later they arrested him. He got a megafuck 20-year sentence because he was X amount of feet from a school and a park. It was a first-time offense for him. He got 4 times the sentence they give to big-time ghetto drug dealers because the location of his parents' house. My elementary school teacher and later my middle school principal, nicest guy ever, was caught pretending to be a student on Snapchat and asking hundreds of girls for nudes. The police believed that he had been doing it for years. He was a family friend and loved by many. Had a wife and several kids. Now he is in jail for 25 years. It kinda makes me sick thinking back to it. Edit. Did some more research. He also tried to hook up with a middle school girl, and after refusal he convinced her to try to kill herself. She is now in a mental hospital after multiple suicide attempts. I didn't see it, but my best friend growing up saw a mutual somewhat friend try and beat a train in their car at a RR crossing. No bueno, the winner was easy to predict. Life definitely was ruined in less than 30 seconds, including bad decision time, and left my best friend traumatized for quite a bit. He was on the other side of the tracks and recognized them, then saw their car hit. We walked the tracks several times to help him deal with it, I guess. Moral of the story? Wait 5 to 20 minutes for the train to pass. Follow-up train story. A year or so later on my birthday, 2 carloads of friends and I were picking up some beer from a guy happy to buy it for minors, which we were. We were headed to the drive-in for a fun night. I was a passenger in the lead truck. The driver, a moron, thought it would be funny to beat the train at an ungated RR crossing, a lot in the Midwest. His reasoning being later explained as well, we'd have beat our friends to the drive-in by 10 minutes. He went so far off the road beating it, he put a 2-inch dent in the front rim of his truck from hitting the train track. I damn near strangled him for taking my life into his stupid hands. Left him to change his flat alone and clambered into our friend's car, beers in hand, seething. Don't mess with trains. Working on Manas AB in Kyrgyzstan. A contractor showed up to the network shop and on his first day got fired. He showed up and asked where the snack room was. Got very upset when he was told there isn't a snack room. Well, Google has a snack room. Dude, you're on a military base in the middle of nowhere. Walk literally next door to the chow hall and grab a candy bar if you need one. About an hour later, he asked where the nap room was. Again, got very upset when he was told there isn't a nap room. So upset that he started throwing shit around and we had to call security forces. He was forcibly removed from the base and banned by the commander his first day. I can't even imagine how hard that destroyed his IT career, since the company had to fly him home the day after they flew him in. No one was going to hire that guy after that. 2 of my childhood friends, sisters I grew up with, intentionally got pregnant at shockingly young ages. One was 16, the other just 14. It was heartbreaking to watch them derail their lives so early. The older sister had so much potential. She was stunning and had been offered several modeling contracts that could have set her up for a bright future. But her boyfriend, who later became her husband, was controlling and threatened to leave her if she pursued any of those opportunities. Out of fear, she gave up on her dreams. The younger sister was always a little wild, and her choices reflected that. She had her first child as a young teenager, and as I hear now, she's had 2 more since, with another on the way. Their decisions not only shaped their own lives, but deeply affected those around them. Their mother, a woman who had already endured so much, worked herself into the ground trying to provide for her daughters and her grandchildren, determined to give them a better chance than she had. Seeing her broken spirit left a lasting impact on me. This dude got hired to work with us. He had all sorts of scabs and just had that look to him. Everyone knew he had a problem with meth. His excuse was he was a prospector and has scabs all the fuck over himself from rocks hitting him. Anyways, he opened up to me one day at lunch about how he's trying to get everything back on track. His wife is hooked on oxy. Most of his money went toward that cause she was hopelessly hooked. For about 4 months, he was doing great. His skin cleared up. He got some color on his face. He was sort of a different person. One day we go to lunch at Waffle House, and while we're eating, this thuggish-looking dude approaches us and offers us some meth. Sorry for having to drop the classiest sentence of all time on you like that. I'm like, hell no, but my coworker is like, let me get your number. Next day, no call, no show. Never heard from him again. A month or so later, a coworker comes in. He saw the dude begging on a street corner and took a pic. Kid who graduated high school the year after me robbed the local McDonald's at gunpoint with some other guy. We live in a smallish town, about 9,000 people, so it didn't take long at all for them to be caught. He was only about 17/18. He was in prison for around 4 years. While I did my undergrad, he was in prison, so I think about that long. He was doing a program where he got time off of his sentence for working in a factory-type setting. Some kind of deal about hours worked turning into time served. He was very close to getting out when he went out to a car with a female CO, got caught having sex with her. His sentence got extended by quite a bit, and now she's in prison too. I used to work at a summer camp, and I was friends with this guy who worked at the rock climbing area. This guy was really chill, super friendly, skilled at his job, all-around cool guy to work with. Turns out, he kept about 200 tabs of LSD in his mini fridge's freezer and sold them around the staff, but never really advertised it. I'm not a super judgmental guy, so I was pretty live and let live about it. That was until he sold to some pretty underage campers. Next day, DEA came and arrested him and his buddy, who also ended up having a shit ton of LSD. Last I heard, he was in the Fed serving 20 to life. Moral of the story? Don't sell LSD to 16-year-olds, kids. Friend of a friend was 18, pretty rich, went out with one of the hottest chicks in the district. He was the first to get a high-powered motorcycle in the neighborhood at our age. She really digged that. One night, he is hooning down a 60 km/h road with his girlfriend on the back. No helmets. It's a 2-lane road, and there is a car ahead of him. He decides to overtake the car on the inside, even though that car is also on the inside lane. He is so close to making it until a drunk driver pulls out in front of him and doesn't stop the car in time. That car oversteps the boundary by enough to block his path. The car on the left serves and avoids the collision. But the biker and his girlfriend hit the nose of that drunk driver at close to 110 km/h, according to forensic report. Girl dies instantly. Guy dies hours later on the street. They were buried next to each other 7 days afterwards. Both families were devastated. Drunk driver faced no charges other than the drink driving charge. Early 20s transient outside my hotel is bugging guests for cash in the parking lot. I send maintenance out to tell them to move along. Maintenance does, guy moves on to the edge of our parking lot. He then starts screaming an astonishing amount of obscenities loud enough for me to hear at the desk. Maintenance comes back in, tells me what's going on, so I call the police to have them ask the guy to move along. No hate, just leave our property and be on your way kind of thing. Cop comes into the desk and is speaking with me when Mr. High Gonna sarcasm is at one of our windows, still screaming at the top of his lungs and pounding on the glass. Now he's probably not 90 pounds soaking wet, so the window is safe, but I just point to the guy and tell the officer we just need him to leave the property, that's all. Officer agrees, goes out to talk with the guy, who then screams at the cop, takes a couple horrible swings at a cop, and is speared into the ground by said cop. 3 other officers show up. First one was likely already close by, as he only took seconds to arrive from the time the swinging started. Now the bum is cuffed and shackled, picked up by 2 officers, and laid across the back seat of the car. At least he left the property. I met this guy in college. He was a big goofy guy, always cracking jokes, but you could tell he was intelligent. Just hadn't had the education. So street smart, I guess. Fun to be around. I hung with him off and on, but definitely considered him a friend. He was a college student that didn't have much and was hustling his way through semesters. So it was surprising one day when he offered to pay for dinner and pulled out a massive wad of 20s. First, I'm thinking he was selling some bud or something, but I wasn't getting in his biz and didn't ask questions. The money didn't slow though. He was basically bawling everywhere he went. Then one day he brings this weird chick around from New York. She locked herself in my bathroom for a couple of hours and was bugged out. Just showed up with him, went right to the bathroom and wouldn't come out. Like a crackhead would. Needless to say, the whole thing was getting weird. He sort of stopped coming around for a few weeks. Then out of the blue, I get a call from him and he says he needs help. Wouldn't talk about it, but wanted to borrow my car. I said okay, not thinking much of it, but thought was random. An hour goes by, and he doesn't show up. I get another call back from a pay phone, and it's him again. He tells me he's running from the FBI, that he had been robbing banks, and that's how he was getting his money. He had just robbed one, and somehow the cops were there. They swoop in on him, and somehow this guy gets away. I wasn't really sure what to say, I just told him to call his sister. I call his roommate and tell him what I had just heard, and he was like, "The FBI is sitting in my living room." 10 minutes later, they were at my house asking me about the call. He was somehow avoiding them, and they were super pissed. After running for about 10 hours, he gave up and turned himself in. He tells a crazy-ass story about laying in a field, and the German shepherds were literally stepping 6 feet from him and not finding him. He laid there for hours until he got cold and realized he was fucked. He was sentenced to 32 years, I think, and served 12. He had robbed 3 banks already. He and this girl were driving across the country hitting banks like Binny and Clyde. He was about to do another one, and the cops knew because this crazy girl he had brought around got caught smoking weed in New York and told the police if they let her go she would tell them about bank robberies. She did, and that's why they were there waiting. I never confirmed this story. It's just what he told me his early days in. Without the girl snitching, he most likely doesn't get caught at that point. The guy went from a promising kid working his way through college that everyone generally liked to a convicted felon that they were going to bury under the prison. I tried to keep in touch with him in prison, but they transferred him around so much I lost touch. Then I saw this article one day where he had gotten out of prison early and was studying law. Had a friend who liked about self-harming, attempted suicide, and being attacked multiple times. Obviously my friends and I went to friends' parents and police. We had evidence, or what we thought was evidence, and conversations that we gave to both parents and police. Said friend was very specific, told us names, places, where she had been self-harming, and ways she tried to kill herself. She even went so far that she wrote letters, claiming they were from her rapist when in reality she wrote them, then burned them because she had said that he was after her. She said that she threw the letters in the fireplace while it was on. She didn't have a fireplace in her house. The person that she said had raped didn't exist, didn't go to our school district or anything. She was kicked out of all her honors classes, extracurricular activities, and lost all friends. On top of that, she wrote songs about what supposedly happened. This was 3 years ago, and she's still paying for it today. Her parents signed her into a mental hospital, and she missed about a semester of school because she refused to tell the truth. She eventually told the truth about a year later. I know for a fact that I'm missing a lot of stuff in here, sorry about that. Just didn't want to write it all out since it's very, very long. Yes, personal responsibility, blah, 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 but dude was not equipped. Guy I graduated high school with, he barely did. I graduated in 2001 in OC SoCal. This dude was not a bad guy, he was a straight A student and great athlete. He turned 18 late into the first semester of our senior year. His parents promptly kicked him out within the week of his birthday. He was first generation, I think from the Philippines. They told him it was time to grow up and get a job, no more school was needed. They owned a few dry cleaners in the area and refused to hire him. Told him he had to make it on his own, just like them. They were a cruel family. Example, he had to leave the majority of his clothes behind at the house for his younger brother. They paid first and last month's rent plus security deposit on an apartment for him, told him to get a job while balancing sports, wrestling, and getting through his senior year. He had aspirations of wrestling in college. He was good and likely could have gotten a scholarship. Over the course of the remainder of our senior year, his grades slipped more and more. He was kicked off the wrestling team for academic performance and more or less stopped showing up to school. Lost touch with him as life tends to make that happen. Found out a few years later on Facebook, while I was still in college, that we was dead in an apparent overdose. After reconnecting with a few old friends, turns his life was nothing but downhill from the day he was kicked out of his parents' home. Alcohol and weed was his start. It ended in much harder drugs and depression. Oh, his brother? Yeah, his parents did not kick him out.